Hello everybody and welcome to today's webinar on the evaluation of compliance. Quick introduction from me, my name is Terry Fisher. I'm here at NQA, I'm the OHS Principal Assessor. So obviously I look at occupational health and safety standards as the primary focus, but I also cover 14,001 and 9,001. So in terms of the evaluation of compliance, we'll run through the various slides. Feel free to ask questions as we go. There is a question box there, and then as questions pop up, I'll try and answer them as we go, but there's also a Q&A session at the end where we can ask questions, and hopefully I can answer them. So without further ado, let's begin. Quick overview from me. Obviously you can see I've got a face for radio there. There will be opportunities for questions, as I've said, and just for clarity, the recording will be made and circulated to all those registered attendees in a few days following the event. Just a quick overview about NQA Certification and Training, the services that we provide. We obviously specialise in a lot of areas, and we've got principal assessors for both environment and for health and safety. And we've got technical specialists for quality, automotive, etc., and energy, information resilience, food safety and risk management, and medical devices. So we can cover a lot of the bases in terms of ISO standards and certification. In terms of support for clients, we do a range of courses, both virtual and e-learning, webinars, etc., etc. We can deliver in-house training, and we can do public training at nationwide locations. A lot of the training is IRCA certified, etc. So it can be a very useful link for career progression and very useful for skills development within your own organisations. The agenda, a quick overview of today. We're looking at what we're trying to achieve in terms of compliance evaluation. Why? What's the benefit? General sort of question and answer time in terms of that. How we can evaluate compliance. What influences and changes the evaluation? Can it be influenced by policy and strategy? Objectives, should it impact on them? Communication, do workers understand why we do things in the way they do and the compliance requirements that they have within their role? The organisational culture and compliance reporting, and a final Q&A session. So here we go with evaluation of compliance. As I say, any questions, put them in the chat box and hopefully I'll be able to see them as we go and hopefully respond appropriately. So compliance, why is it in the standards? It's in the standards because it's all aligned. The standards are designed to deliver the policy requirements, and within all the policy requirements, there is a commitment there to comply with statutory compliance requirements across all the three disciplines of 9, 14, 45, so quality, environment and health and safety. Compliance requirements, there's various terms used and they're all interchangeable really from our perspective. It's not so much what you call them from our viewpoint, it's more about what they do and what they deliver and what they mean for the organisation. So obviously you can use the term compliance requirements, some people call them legal requirements, some people as legal and other requirements depending on which standard they're referencing and the various terms that are used. All organisations have some form of compliance requirements and therefore the management standards must reflect this in reality to be effective. There is further guidance in 14,001 Annex A and also in 45,001 2018 Annex A in terms of clauses 9, 1, 2. So in terms of compliance, so we'll just make it clear that compliance requirements are not just statutory mandatory compliance requirements. They could be organisational compliance requirements. It's often confused that it only applies to statutory legal compliance. It's not about that at all. It includes that, but that's only one element of compliance that we'll be looking at as we go throughout the various presentations. As I say, the core requirement of ISO management standard is compliance with applicable statutory and regulatory requirements, and that's included within the scope of the management system and also a policy commitment within the various requirements of the standards. So there's a few clauses there that's quoted. Don't get me wrong, we won't be having a test on the clause numbers or anything like that. It's just we see this as a helpful guide to guide you through and be able to link clauses to actual application and real world application and requirements within the organisation. That's why we've looked at the clause numbers themselves. It doesn't only come up in one clause element, so it isn't only in clause 5, for example, it's in clause 6, and as you can also see, so the commitment is in clause 5, the actual identification of applicability is in clause 6, and then the evaluation, which is the checking element of the Plan, Do, Check, Act process, is in clause 9. And as you can see from the different standards, 45 uses the phrase determination of legal and other requirements. 14,001 environmental management uses compliance obligations, and 9,001 talks about applicable requirements. So all those phrases are perfectly acceptable within your management standards in your systems, especially when you're looking at integrated management processes. So why are they there and what's the benefit? If we agree that all organisations have some form of compliance requirement, then having a method of evaluation that confirms that relevant status of those compliance is a common sense approach within the management standards. So it's again this Plan, Do, Check and Act process. Evaluation of compliance is not maintaining the legal or compliance register within the system. So maintaining that register of up-to-date legislation is not the evaluation of compliance. It's one element of the compliance process. Assuming that because we're aware of existing and revised compliance obligations that we know we have controls in place does not provide confirmation that the processes are and controls are delivering effective compliance requirements. So this is where we actually need to understand and physically check and gather evidence to confirm that compliance requirements are being met. That again is going around the cycle of the Plan, Do, Check, Act process. We need to confirm that compliance status by evaluation, not just assumption. So as I say, just because within organisations, a lot of people have organisational knowledge, they know certain processes and activities are taking place, so therefore it's assumed that they are taking place effectively. But the management systems and standards want you to confirm that, taking a sample of evidence. It also makes sure that your processes are actually delivering what they were intended to do, not only in terms of your product and your process, but actually the compliance elements that could be built into your processes. And that, depending on the discipline, could be very different from one discipline to another. Compliance is there for a real world reason. Everyone needs to play their part in achieving it. And it's very important in terms of the credibility of the organisation and the credibility of the ISO systems and the process controls that we're all implementing. If we take a step back from the evaluation process and consider section 6 of the management standards, for 45,001, 613 is determination of legal and other requirements. And in clause B of that particular element, it says determine how these applicable requirements apply to the organisation and what needs to be communicated. Then these clause requirements can detail specifically what is to be done, and that will also confirm and help in the evaluation of the process, because if we know exactly how we're delivering or what we're meant to do for that compliance requirement, and we specify how we deliver that compliance, then that gives us, in effect, an audit program to confirm that compliance has been delivered effectively. So it really is a method of translating some of these compliance requirements into real-world applications within your organisation. It's worth investing the time and the resource to actually think about how it applies to you. And for each individual piece of legislation, for example, it can be worth detailing what those requirements actually mean to your organisation. A piece of legislation might be 50 or 60 pages long, and actually it's only key elements that apply to your organisation and your requirements. So it's worth breaking that down and not just copying and pasting the legal text, which can be difficult to determine and difficult to interpret, but actually putting it into real world application for your organisation. You know, so where it talks about assessment of chemicals, for example, for KOSH, actually explain how you do that in your processes and where that record is and or where those records are kept and how they're centrally registered, etc., and how frequently they're going to do. All that information can be contained in the legal register or the compliance register for an organisation as a signposting mechanism to help someone who doesn't have a lot of specialist knowledge to understand exactly what these compliance regulations mean and these compliance requirements. Like I say, we must consider each line entry of a compliance register or legal register, whatever the terminology be, to determine what requirements mean to our organisation. And as I've said, that will help us determine the requirements and how we measure the compliance status of those. Here's a quick example of an evaluation process. You know, KOSH is a requirement within the UK legislation. So that may include some local exhaust ventilation systems, and they need to be inspected under the KOSH regulations in the UK every 14 months by a competent person. Maintenance arrangements may then happen to maintain the equipment, etc. And it may be your insurers or another interested party, maybe the ones that are undertaking that inspection and confirming that process control in relation to that. It also may need specialist support in terms of monitoring and measurement and ensuring that the system not only operates, but operates effectively given the particular application for that particular process or activity. The evaluation process could include an internal audit or an element of internal auditing where a number of samples of insurance reports or LEV reports are there and available to you. So you could do an internal audit of that. And it's also confirming then that not only are you doing your compliance requirements, but it's also checking the processes that may be required beyond those compliance requirements. So you may have complied with the requirement of having them inspected, but then if those inspection reports identify corrective actions, for example, or things that aren't working as effectively as they could, then those actions need to be followed up and closed out to ensure that the process and the mechanisms within the process control are delivering that compliance as required. So it isn't just about confirming the legal compliance elements, it's about confirming the effective process control that those compliance requirements are required to deliver. So it's about looking at it in the round, and you can use internal audit processes to help identify and confirm compliance status. Routine monitoring could be captured in software programs, etc. There's a whole myriad of things that can help with the compliance process. Evaluation can take many forms, both routine and specialist. So a lot of compliance may be confirmed by routine records and monitoring that take place within the organisation. That include, as we've discussed, internal auditing, so process control methods, confirming SOPs, standard operating procedures, safe systems of work, etc., are delivering the requirements as we intend them. Routine data capture could also indicate, that the process is functioning effectively and appropriately. I'm thinking there of, it could be data collection, automated stack emission monitoring could be there, discharge consent testing or continual monitoring could be in place in certain organisations. There's a whole myriad of different ways that methods can be identified for confirming compliance. Even operational controls, it could be down to an individual to monitor the data or the readouts from software and programs, and they can then report on any exceedances or non-compliance in relation to discharge consents, etc. So the myriad of how we can monitor compliance is really important, and it's really important that we make that link and close that cycle down in terms of, so it's not just collating the data, but it's also then reacting on that data. And yes, if it's great if it always confirms that everything's working appropriately, but if it doesn't, it also means we've got to take action and improve the various processes. We also must, as part of the standard requirements, determine how frequently we conduct the compliance evaluation and the methods of evaluation. For example, that's now clause 912 in 45001/2018, and it's also clause 912 in ISO 14001/2015. So you don't have to do the same frequency of compliance for everything. It would be impractical if you've got a compliance register, for example, and that might have, I don't know, 70 odd pieces of legislation in it. Well, to do them all on the same day or whatever, or confirm their compliance all at the same point in the year or whatever, may be unreasonable and ineffective. So you can choose the compliance requirement evaluation frequency in terms of the risk on a risk basis. So the potential impact to the organization, etc., etc., etc. And some, and based on how the process is normally controlled, or the activity is normally controlled. For automated processes, it can be, well, we continually monitor the process output, so it's almost a continual process of monitoring the data. Whereas some things may be evaluated for compliance 6 monthly, 12 monthly, 18 monthly, 3 monthly, or whatever the organisation must determine. It's down to them to make that judgment call, but it must obviously comply with the legal requirements where stated. But the point there is that not all compliance requirements need to be treated in exactly the same way in terms of frequency of evaluation. You can flex that according to the various operations and the applicability to your own organisation. We must consider the process of evaluation not to be static or fixed. It may change, and based on past performance or experience, we may decide more or less frequency is appropriate. The overall impact or significance of the activity will help to determine the frequency. So something that's both environmentally or safety critical or business critical may be looked at more frequently than those that are less significant in terms of impact on the organisation or potential impact on the workers or the environment, for example. Changes in process can also impact on the evaluation of frequency. So introducing a new process may impact on the evaluation frequency in terms of it's new, you may not have confidence in the various things, so you may look at it and say, well, we're going to do it quite frequently until we've got confidence in the process and its control, and then you can change that as that develops and the system matures and you get more confidence in the process. That could be expanded out. Different processes and different technologies can have a change. It could be a new piece of equipment that could be available that actually could reduce your reliance on timed evaluation compliance. It could be then, we can introduce almost continual monitoring of that, and it could automate alerts and various things. So there's various things in terms of how it applies to you that you can consider. Other considerations can be changes in staffing, you know, a new operational crew, for example. You may be, until you've got confidence in, and they've got confidence in the processes, and they've become familiar with all the controls and applicability, you may want to look at something more frequently. Lessons learned from other areas of the organisation. So an incident in one particular department or function could actually alert across an organisation or a group of companies to alert, actually that's something that we need to be aware of, and we'll reflect that in our considerations for the evaluation of compliance. And also industry sector information. You can get alerts from various industry sector groups, depending on the sector group that you're in. And this can be a great source of information. You know, we don't want to repeating the same mistakes across multiple sites within the same industry. And there's a lot of forums there sharing good practice and sharing information on, you know, good controls, appropriate controls, incident management, and learning lessons from other organisations within the same sector. The other thing that can change the consideration is also the policy and strategy of the company. For example, as a company may decide to withdraw from a particular process or operational activity and introduce another one, so that can change the requirements in terms of evaluation of compliance. It can also change the compliance requirements themselves as you modify and update your processes and change them to meet the needs of the business and the interested parties. Anybody got any questions? There's nothing being typed in that I can see on the questions, so I'm quite happy to move on. I've put together some questions here and some brief overview answers. So obviously, policy and strategy. Can the evaluation and compliance performance influence policy and strategy? I would say it can. It certainly can and does in terms of the output from the compliance evaluation may indicate that a process has become unsustainable or unsuitable and may need to be upgraded or replaced. So that's going to input on the policy and strategy of the organisation for replacement. May mean obviously capital expenditure or changes in working practices, and the timescale. It could be imminent. It could be a critical process. It may impact on the business continuity arrangement for an organisation, etc., etc. So this is where it can really have an influence in policy and strategy. The majority of cases, the evaluation will be confirming the desired outcome is the hopeful thing, but it could also influence where that policy and strategy, as I've said earlier, where that's being introduced, whether introducing new processes, new controls, new activities, new operations, you need to be considered and how you're going to confirm that those operations are working effectively, which can impact on the design of the process, the layout, the resources required, etc. So it's a good consideration to look at this in the feasibility and design elements of strategy change and process development. Organisations are increasingly under scrutiny regarding compliance and have to have confidence in their management systems to aid that delivery. That's the whole point of this. It's not just about being legally compliant for the sake of it. It's good practice. It protects the business, it protects the organisation, it protects the workers and the environment of the organisation, but it also protects the organisation in the long term. Anybody that's been involved in significant non-compliance with enforcement agencies will no doubt testify to the potential huge disruption that it causes to organisations and the potential huge impact it can have on both financial, operational and morale of an organisation. In relation to objectives, compliance can influence objectives. These may be decided and set to allow for an upgrade or replacement of a process. This may involve automated software alerts, updated capture, automated capture of data, as well as plant and hardware changes, All these things can be built into objectives. So it's about the management system in its entirety working to deliver an effective process in line with the requirements of that particular organisation. Like I say, maybe the objective will be to close down a process or phase it out over time. Objectives and plans are there to deliver improvements and benefits. It could be an environmental improvement to stop doing a particular activity over a period of time. That may be related to a change or proposed change in legislation, for example. Communications is key. As with any element of management systems and standards, communications is one of the fundamentals, and workers need to understand why you're asking to do things in a particular way in relation to compliance and how to do their job overall. Their roles in the process and the potential significance is really important for them to understand. So when they say, oh, you know, why do I need to do it that way? Not just saying, well, do it that way because I've told you so, doing it that way because and understanding the needs and benefits of the organisation and why it's done that way is a really key question. You've also got to, in terms of communication, confirm the process. How do your workers and your operators know what to do? Do they have the underpinning knowledge and understanding of the significant potential of compliance issues and non-compliance issues? Do they know how to report concerns and how to raise them, and also how to react to some concerns if they're, you know, if they're in leadership roles or just lead operator roles? And do we have the information we need and evidence to analyse? That's the first thing. How are we going to, how are we going to confirm this compliance? We must understand and identify a method that's going to give us reliable information to confirm that we are compliant with the requirements. The culture of all of this can be really important in terms of how people react to information and how that's perceived across the organisation. Example there, the organisation's culture can be dramatically impacted on compliance performance. So if you imagine if workers are blamed and criticised when reporting issues or exceedances in compliance, then are they likely to record it and report it next time? Would that benefit the compliance process? I suggest it wouldn't. It would certainly put people off. The same can be said when investigating compliance issues. We want to know what's happened, or we don't want to look at how we appoint blame. We want to understand the reasons for that process failure. We want to understand what's gone wrong. We want to encourage people to understand how they could have impacted and reduced that and their part to play in improving that going forward. So it's about engaging with people and going back to the communication elements. So all these things can influence compliance and compliance evaluation. In terms of leadership, we need leadership at all levels of the organisation. It's not just about the senior execs or whatever. It's everyone within the organisation taking leadership for their own operations and their own tasks and activities. They want to get information to be able to use that information to make responsible decisions. So we need to give them the wherewithal. We need to educate them. We need to talk to them. We need to understand what changes within the process, how things develop. So it's about that open culture of transferring and communicating effectively. As we said, it's about the management and the organisation want to be confident in their systems and their processes are delivering what's required. And if they're not, consider what can be done and should be done to improve. This is what compliance is about. It isn't just about, well, there is a threat of legislative action or enforcement action. Compliance needs to be built into an organisation's culture, not just relying on the enforcement activity that could potentially come about for non-compliance. So the compliance process, in terms of the various things, you've got interested parties, You've got risks and opportunities. From those, you establish and document the compliance obligations, define what is required and how it applies to you, document how you deliver this requirement in terms of process steps and controls, define the evaluation method and frequency, conduct the compliance evaluation and monitoring process, take corrective action and improvement as required, review the effectiveness of those actions, and conduct a regular update of the compliance and obligations requirement, which then takes you back round the cycle. We just got one. The question we've just received is, what standards would product safety requirements come under? 45,001 or 9,001. It depends what you mean by product requirements. In terms of designing and producing products to be used safely, it's in 9001, but it was also come under 45,001 in terms of workers and end users. There's no point designing a product that, although you can produce it safely as an organization, that when it's then put into service, it injures people or is harmful and isn't suitable. This is why we have CE marking, CA marking, etc., etc. So elements of that, depending on what your organization does, it could come under one and both of both 45 and 9,000. Primarily for the end users, it's 9001 and product development in terms of meeting your statutory and end user requirements, but also I would say it also comes into links into 45. So reporting of compliance evaluation status is another key element, because it's no point having all this information and then not using it appropriately. So in terms of the management standard and the ISO certification process, in terms of management systems, clause 9.3, management review is the primary clause for senior level awareness of compliance status. And that's the sort of mechanism used within the management system standards to report on compliance status or non-compliance status, which is also very important. It isn't about just going into the meeting and saying everything's rosy when actually things may not be. It's about making senior leadership aware, and also so that they can allocate suitable resources and actions and timeframes, etc., to develop improvement plans for non-compliance or future compliance, because a lot of this stuff can be horizon scanning in terms of there's going to be a change in legislation which has been publicised, etc., to meet those new requirements. We need to then build these into our processes now so that we're ready for the launch of those requirements. And that's particularly relevant across all three disciplines in terms of quality, health and safety, and environment. Organizations find it very difficult to react very quickly to product changes and various things. You know, if you look at the automotive industry, for example, there'll be horizon scanning about emissions in different markets and various things, safety considerations in different markets, all these various things, and they don't do it as each car leaves the assembly line. They do it in the design element. So this is about making sure we've got suitable controls in place to identify compliance requirements and potential future status of those requirements. So when we need to have them in place by. Do not, in management review, gloss over the issues that need to be addressed. Management review is the formal mechanism within the ISO management systems to alert management to requirements. And, you know, this links back to leadership and commitment, and the cycle goes around in the plan, do, check, act process. It really is important in terms of compliance not to paint an unfounded rosy picture when things are not going as well as they should. And it also reflects on the culture of the organisation, we want an open culture whereby you can disclose these things without fear or retribution. So that again is also important across all the disciplines in terms of the culture and the communications of within the organisations. There's another question come in. Somebody's asked the question, I haven't mentioned compliance with requirements with regard to ISO 27001. Yes, there are requirements to 27001. I don't cover that, and that's the reason I haven't mentioned it. I didn't want to bring people into questions that I could therefore not answer. But there are requirements in information security, and some of those are legal, some of those are organizational compliance requirements, or it could be customary compliance requirements. There's a whole range of compliance requirements within all the management system standards across every discipline, food, for example, etc., etc. So there are specific compliance requirements across all the ISO management standards, but I haven't, like I say, I haven't included them specifically because I wouldn't be in a position to answer questions on those particular elements. But the same principles apply across all the management systems. Identifying the applicability of compliance, checking that you've got enabled to deliver that compliance, confirming that that compliance has been delivered, and then taking action to ensure you continue to deliver that and any future compliance requirements. So the same processes would apply across all the ISO management systems. Any other questions? So, as you can see from that, that was a very quick whistle-stop tour of compliance and its requirements. The main points I would say, the biggest thing that we're, the biggest misconception of compliance requirements that we see are the maintaining of the legal register or maintaining of the compliance register is seen as the evaluation of compliance. That's the most common misinterpretation of the clause requirements. Keeping the register up to date is not the compliance requirement. And the evaluation of compliance, it's identifying the applicability of the compliance requirement. And as I've said earlier, the important element there is to then translate that into meaningful things as it applies to your organization. It should be viewed that when you're doing that, maintaining of the knowledge and applicability of compliance, the more work you put into that and the more detail you put into that as it applies to your organization, the easier people will find it to follow the process and follow and understand the requirements as you go. It's an investment in time, and it can make the compliance process far simpler when it's already been documented or explained in, let's say, a compliance or legal register. And the other common misconception is that all compliance requirements are purely statutory. They aren't. In a lot of organizations, the compliance requirements with customer requirements, for example, or requirements that a group or the leadership of an organization deem appropriate for it to consider, such as membership of particular trade bodies or whatever, or associations, all those become compliance requirements. And once they are identified as compliance requirements within the organization, they should all be given an equal weighting in terms of, well, if it's something that we commit to deliver, then we should confirm that delivery. And it should be on an equal status to any other compliance requirement, whether it be statutory or non-statutory. So hopefully you've found the webinar of use. If anyone has any questions, by all means, shout up now, or as I say, we will be distributing the recording and the slides and presentation for all those of you that are registered. Feel free to contact NQA if anyone's got any training needs or any information, or if anyone's got any suggestions for future webinars, things that you feel we can support you with in terms of delivering future webinars or questions and answer sessions, etc. For my part, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for all your input into the questions and the various things. Keep safe and well, and I'll see you next time.